Dear everyone present. Uh, so kudos to Ramaiah University for thinking ahead, and to our very elderly statesman, Srinivas Murthy, for taking this initiative and bringing us all together to discuss very necessary, crucial issues. Um, I hope it's been good set of reflections from the morning, starting with the very thoughtful directions given by Honorable Chief Minister down to every uh, expert and also various stakeholders who have spoken on this issue here. Um, I have unfortunately not had the uh, fortune of listening to everyone because I've been caught up with a lot of other work, so I just walked in. I do not have the advantage of absorbing all the thoughts from morning and then sort of reflecting on it. That would have been a more fruitful exercise, but Uma Madhavan has done a good job of reflecting on the whole day's proceedings in some sort. So that gives me something to build on. Um, so before we come to the fiscal federalism, if you just take federalism, so in our country, in our, like many other things, we all dwell on. We seem to be perfectly at ease with some things, but we are actually dwelling in contradictions. Federalism is one such. You can ask, I think, anybody in this country, uh, do we all agree with federalism? And I'm sure to the last person, everybody will say, yes, 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 we are all for, I'm for federalism. But when it comes to what do you mean by federalism, I think it has always been a contested uh, space. Each person has his or her own definition of federalism, and then we get into contradictions there. But somehow we have muddled through this contradiction for 75 odd years. From day one, we knew we wanted to be a federalist, but what is that federalism? It's always been contested. So, in the initial days, we went through a phase where we all felt that we need a strong center core which holds everybody together. I think that went on for about a decade or two. Then you have a natural process of voices coming up from below and saying that, look, I have grown up too, and I can be an adult in the process. So, dad and mom share with me the responsibility. So then the consensus of what is federalism slightly shifted with the tunes of the times. And then for 30, 40 years, though there were, surreptitious moves here, there from both sides. Of course, in this whole game, one side has always been much stronger by structure. The union has always been, has had several advantages that it can leverage over and make sure that its interests are protected. But nevertheless, the parts that make up the union, they also managed to make some progress. And for about 30, 40 years, we came to another set of consensus, and that prevailed, I would say, till about 2010, 15, so on. But not that there was a perfect consensus and understanding. But what has happened in the last 10 years is a strong attempt to again reset what is federalism in India. Because the people who are trying to reset it, if you ask them, they will say, oh, we are the die-hard federalists. But at the same time, they are trying to reset our understanding of federalism to what they think it ought to be. And what people like me think that they're doing it in a zero-sum game, which it need not have been. It could have been a constructive approach, but the current federal union government seems to have taken that, you can only gain something if somebody else loses something. So that sort of an effort is going on in the last 10 years. Now I come to the fiscal space, and in the end I will briefly touch on, again, non-fiscal space, which is also equally alarming, and people like me, maybe rightfully or not so rightfully, we are very alarmed about what will follow what is going on now beyond the fiscal space. So I'm sure you heard from the morning that Karnataka has been a major casualty of this resetting the equation between the fiscal equation between the center and states that has been going on in the last 10 years. And this started way at the beginning. This started in the very first month, in fact, because it was the time when the 14th Finance Commission, which was set up in the UPA government, with appointees from the UPA government, including Mr. Y.V. Reddy and Mr. Govindrav. I'm not sure if he's here, he may have left. So Govindrav was a member and Mr. Y.V. Reddy was the chairperson. So they had completed their work on the 14th Finance Commission. Most of their recommendations were ready. And that's when there was a change of regime in Delhi. And the new dispensation came. And I think barely a month or 2 months, not even a month, was there between the new government and the time for submission of the Finance Commission report in 2014. Mr. Y.V. Reddy is the chairman. And in the Prime Minister's office, there was a joint secretary by name Mr. Subramaniam. I don't know, of late, recently, if any of you has heard about Subramaniam. I think now he's the CEO of Niti Aayog currently. Is the CEO of Niti Aayog currently, and Mr. Subramaniam was then joint secretary or so in the Prime Minister's office. So Mr. Subramaniam was given the specific task by the then newly elected Prime Minister to go and talk to Finance Commission. And what was the mandate? To force the Finance Commission to keep the devolution ratio at 32% and not to raise it to 42%. And Mr. Subramaniam claims that he was part of a tripartite discussion between Mr. Y.V. Reddy, Mr. Narendra Modi and himself in the middle to negotiate and somehow prevail upon, convince the Finance Commission not to raise the devolution ratio beyond 32%. That is the ideal scenario. And in a worst case scenario, to not raise it to 42%, but maybe 36%, 37%, a middle path. But supposedly, I can quote Mr. Subramaniam. I have his quote here. This recently, Reporters Collective in India have done a story on the statements of Mr. Subramaniam. So Subramaniam went and met Y.V. Reddy, and finally, after several rounds of discussion, Y.V. Reddy said, nothing doing. This is my prerogative. I am going to recommend 42%. Please go tell your boss. He can accept it or reject it, but I'm not going to scale it down to 32%, or I'm not going to scale it down to anything below 42%. You can choose to accept it, or you can choose to reject the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission and set up another Finance Commission, which is the only option available under Constitution. So this is in the first month of the NDA government, NDA in 2014. So in the very first month, they were trying to undermine devolution and sharing of revenues with the state governments. And if any of you is interested for further information, you can cull out the uh, report by the Reporters Collective. And I believe this video was on YouTube. And once the Reporters Collective came out with this news report, the video of Mr. Subramaniam has now been taken down from YouTube. I will not say anything more about that. Now, coming back, so this started from the very first day and it continues even today. You might say, how do you substantiate that it continues? Now, earlier, when there was 32% devolution recommendation by the Finance Commission, in reality, about 27-28% of the gross tax revenue of union government was getting devolved to states. So when there was 32% mandatory requirement, actual devolution was 28% of the GTR. Then it got raised to 42%. But out of 42%, the 42% didn't come to states. What actually came to states was only about 34, 33, 35%. Now the 15th Finance Commission recommended 41% devolution. And somebody has probably pointed out during the day, actual devolution against 41%, actual devolution is 29 to 30% of the gross tax revenues. So what is claimed is 41%, but in reality, states are getting only 29%. How is this happening? Because the union government has brazenly shifted taxes into the cess and surcharge category. Not that the cess and surcharges didn't exist before the last 10 years. They have always existed. And as you know, I don't need to elaborate, I suppose, cess and surcharges do not go to consolidated fund. They go into a separate account, which the union government is not obligated to share with the states. So every paisa in the cess and surcharge remains with the union government. It's not shared with the states. Before this government came in about 2010, the cess and surcharges were about 8 to 9% of the gross tax revenue of the union government. Now in the last, I think 21-22, they went up from a low of 8-9%, they went up to the extent of about 22% of the gross tax revenue of the union government, which means this 20, 21, 22%, not a single pie of that will be shared with the state government. The entire money remains with the government. So, for example,